China just test-fired a missile that can supposedly sink a carrier from 2,000 miles away. Russia's been bragging about hypersonic weapons that move at Mach 9. Iran claims it can turn the Persian Gulf into a graveyard for American warships. And yet the U.S. Navy keeps sailing billion-dollar aircraft carriers right into contested waters like they're on a Sunday cruise. Either the admirals have lost their minds, or they know something the rest of us don't. Spoiler alert, it's the second one. So why isn't the world's most expensive military force sweating these so-called carrier killers? Keep watching, and you'll find out why these floating cities are a lot harder to sink than the headlines suggest. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The DF-21D, China calls it the carrier killer. And on paper, it sounds terrifying. This thing is a ballistic missile that launches into space, comes screaming back down at Mach 10, and supposedly has enough precision to hit a moving ship. That's the claim anyway. The Chinese military loves showing off videos of missiles obliterating stationary targets in the desert. Very impressive. But here's the thing about stationary targets in the desert. They don't move. They don't jam your sensors. They don't shoot back. And they definitely don't have an entire battle group protecting them with layers of defenses that would make a medieval castle jealous. See, China's never actually hit a moving carrier. Not even close. They've hit a barge. Once. In controlled conditions. With nobody shooting back. That's like saying you're ready for the NBA, because you made a free throw in your driveway. The gap between a test range and actual combat is so massive you could fit the entire Pacific Ocean in it. Which coincidentally is exactly where these carriers operate. But let's pretend for a second that China's missile works exactly as advertised. Let's say it can find a carrier, track it through countermeasures, and deliver a warhead with pinpoint accuracy. Even then, it's got to get through the most sophisticated air defense network ever created. And that's where things get interesting. Picture this. A carrier strike group isn't just one ship floating around hoping for the best. It's a floating fortress with overlapping defensive rings that extend for hundreds of miles in every direction. The outer ring starts with the E-2 Hawkeye, an airborne radar plane that can see threats from 300 miles away. That's farther than the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco. This thing is in the air constantly, watching everything. I mean everything. Birds, planes, missiles, that weird weather balloon from last year. Nothing gets close without being spotted first. Then you've got the fighter jets. Super Hornets loaded with air-to-air missiles, flying combat air patrol 24/7s. Their job is simple. Kill anything that looks threatening before it gets within spitting distance of the carrier. And trust me, they're very good at their job. These aren't your grandfather's propeller planes. These are multi-role fighters with radar, so advanced they can track a baseball at 50 miles. Hypersonic missile. They see it coming. Now let's say something gets past the fighters. Unlikely, but let's play along. Next up, you've got the Aegis destroyers and cruisers. These ships are basically floating missile batteries with radar systems so powerful they can track hundreds of targets simultaneously. They carry SM-6 missiles, which are designed specifically to intercept ballistic missiles. And unlike the movies, these things actually work. The Navy's been testing them for years, and they've got a pretty impressive success rate. Not perfect, nothing in warfare is perfect, but good enough to make any adversary think twice about pushing the button. But wait, there's more. If something somehow makes it past the Aegis ships, the carrier itself has its own defenses. CRAM. Electronic warfare systems that can jam, spoof, or outright confuse incoming threats. And if all else fails, the carrier's got the Phalanx CIWS. Picture a giant rotary cannon that fires 4,500 rounds per minute. That's 75 bullets every single second. It's basically a wall of lead designed to shred anything that gets too close. The Navy calls it the last line of defense. Sailors call it R2D2 because, well, look at it. So that's at least 4 layers of defense before a missile even gets close to the carrier. And here's the kicker. The Navy's been improving these systems constantly. Every single deployment, they're learning, adapting, upgrading. Meanwhile, China's carrier killer missile has never faced any of this in actual combat. It's untested, unproven, a theoretical threat being sold as an existential one. And that brings us to the real secret weapon. The one nobody talks about. Geography. China can brag all it wants about carrier killers, but they've got to find the carrier first. And that's a lot harder than it sounds. The Pacific Ocean is absolutely massive. We're talking 63 million square miles of water. That's almost half the planet's ocean surface. Finding a carrier group in that expanse is like trying to find a specific car in all of North America while blindfolded. And the car is moving, and actively trying not to be found. The Navy doesn't just sail around broadcasting its location. Carriers practice something called MCON, emissions control. They shut down radars, limit radio chatter, and basically go dark. No electronic signature. No way to track them unless you physically see them. And good luck with that, because the ocean is really big and carriers are surprisingly good at hiding when they want to. China's options for finding them are limited. Satellites? Sure, they've got satellites. But satellites are predictable. They follow orbital paths. The Navy knows exactly when Chinese reconnaissance satellites are overhead, and they know exactly how to avoid them. It's like knowing when the security camera in a store rotates away. Timing is everything, and carriers have a lot of ocean to disappear into between satellite passes. What about aircraft? China could send reconnaissance planes to search for carriers. Except those planes would have to get past the combat air patrol we talked about earlier. And if they get shot down, which they would, that's an act of war. Suddenly, you're not talking about a limited strike anymore. You're talking about full-scale conflict. Most countries aren't ready to pull that trigger over a single carrier. Then there's the submarine problem. China's got subs, sure. And American attack submarines are the best in the world at hunting other subs. They're quieter, better trained, and have decades more experience. Any Chinese sub trying to track a carrier is probably going to find itself being tracked instead. And once you're being tracked by a Virginia-class attack sub, your life expectancy drops significantly. Let's not forget that even if China somehow finds the carrier, tracks it, and fires the missile, they've got to do all of this in a window of about 20 minutes. That's roughly how long it takes for a ballistic missile to travel from launch site to target. 20 minutes doesn't sound like much, but in naval warfare, it's an eternity. It's enough time for the carrier to maneuver, enough time for the Aegis ships to launch interceptors, enough time for electronic warfare to start jamming guidance systems. 20 minutes is plenty of time for things to go catastrophically wrong for whoever fired that missile. And here's something most people don't think about. Firing a ballistic missile at a U.S. carrier isn't a video game. It's not a surgical strike with no consequences. The moment that missile launches, every sensor in the Pacific lights up. Satellites see it. Aegis ships track it. Now China's got a carrier that's probably still afloat and very angry. Plus they've just revealed the location of their launch site. And the US has a long memory when it comes to things like that. Those launch sites become targets. Instant retaliation. This isn't a consequence-free weapon. It's an act of war that invites devastating response. Because those are the new hotness. Russia's got the Zircon. China's got the DF-17. Everyone's terrified of hypersonic missiles because they're fast. Like stupid fast. Mach 5 and above. The idea is they're too fast to intercept. Except that's not quite true. Yes, they're fast, but fast doesn't mean unstoppable. Hypersonic missiles have physics problems that nobody talks about. It makes the missile harder to steer. And steering is kind of important when you're trying to hit a moving target the size of 3 football fields that's actively maneuvering to avoid you. Also, hypersonic missiles don't come out of nowhere. They still have to be launched. That launch still gets detected. And while the missile itself is fast, the kill chain behind it isn't. You've still got to find the carrier, get targeting data, process it, launch. By the time that hypersonic missile is in the air, the carrier's already moved. At 30 knots, a carrier can cover a mile every 2 minutes. Doesn't sound like much, but when you're traveling at hypersonic speeds with limited maneuverability, even small changes in target position matter a lot. And here's the dirty little secret about hypersonic weapons. They're incredibly expensive. Russia and China have them, sure, but they don't have thousands of them. They've got dozens, maybe hundreds if we're being generous. So they fire off a hypersonic missile at a carrier, and let's say it somehow gets through all the defenses. It hits, damages the carrier, maybe even mission kills it. Congratulations. You just used one of your most expensive weapons to take out one ship. The US has 11 carriers. And more importantly, it has hundreds of bombers. submarines, and missile launchers ready to retaliate. That's not a winning trade. That's barely a scratch on American naval power. The math just doesn't work in the attacker's favor. Even in a best-case scenario where carrier-killer missiles work perfectly, you'd need dozens of them to guarantee a kill, and you'd need to fire them all at once to overwhelm the defenses. That's an enormous commitment of resources for one target. Meanwhile, the rest of the U.S. military is very much still operational and extremely motivated to return the favor. There's also the human factor, nobody talks about. American carrier crews train for this constantly. They run drills. They simulate missile attacks. They practice damage control. These aren't conscripts who got handed a rifle last week. These are professionals who've spent years preparing for the worst-case scenario. When alarms go off, they don't panic. They execute. And execution matters a lot when seconds count. Compare that to China or Russia. Sure, they've got impressive weapons on paper. But when was the last time they fought a naval war? Russia's Black Sea Fleet got embarrassed by a country without a real navy. China hasn't been in a naval engagement since the 1980s. And that was a brief skirmish with Vietnam. They've got shiny new toys, but they don't have experience using them under pressure. There's no substitute for combat experience. And the U.S. Navy has it in spades. And let's talk about the elephant in the other room: nuclear weapons. If carrier-killer missiles had nuclear warheads, yeah, that would be a problem. But nobody's using nukes on carriers because that's how you start World War III. Conventional warheads are all anyone's seriously considering, and conventional warheads have to hit something vital to do real damage. Carriers are big, really big. A single missile hit, even a successful one, probably isn't going to sink it. Damage it? Sure, but carriers are designed to take hits and keep fighting. They've got compartmentalization, redundant systems, damage control teams that are scary good at their jobs. In World War II, carriers survived kamikaze attacks and kept operating. These modern carriers are even tougher. Now, I'm not saying carriers are invincible. They're not. Nothing is. In a full-scale war, carriers would take casualties. Ships would be damaged. Some might even be lost. But the idea that carrier-killer missiles have made carriers obsolete is just wrong. It's a narrative that sounds scary but falls apart when you look at the details. The U.S. Navy isn't ignoring these threats. They're preparing for them, constantly. And the preparations involve a lot more than just hoping the missiles miss. The Navy's investing billions in next-generation electronic warfare, directed energy weapons, better sensors, faster interceptors. They're not sitting still waiting to become targets. They're adapting. And here's the thing about the U.S. military: when they adapt, they do it with the world's biggest defense budget, backing them up. We're talking $800 billion a year. China's defense budget is maybe a third of that. Russia's is a rounding error. Money doesn't win wars by itself, but it sure helps when you're developing countermeasures to every threat on the horizon. There's also the alliance factor. The U.S. doesn't sail alone. When a carrier group deploys, it's often working with allied navies, Japanese destroyers, Australian frigates, South Korean warships. These aren't token gestures. These are capable ships with their own sensors and weapons, adding even more layers to the defensive network. An attack on a U.S. carrier isn't just an attack on America. It's an attack on the entire alliance structure. And that alliance includes some of the most advanced militaries on the planet. Meanwhile, China's busy trying to figure out how to make friends in the region. Not going great, by the way. Turns out building artificial islands and claiming the entire South China Sea doesn't make you popular with your neighbors. Nobody wants to be in China's corner if things go kinetic. Russia, they've got their hands full in Ukraine and aren't in any position to fight a naval war in the Pacific. Iran might be loud, but the Persian Gulf isn't the Pacific Ocean, and their capabilities are regional at best. So when you add it all up, the layered defenses, the geographical challenges, the political consequences, the technological countermeasures, the human training, and the alliance structure, carrier-killer missiles start looking a lot less scary. Are they a threat? Absolutely. Should the Navy take them seriously? Without question. But are they the end of the aircraft carrier? Not even close. The carrier remains the most flexible, powerful tool for projecting force across oceans. It brings an entire air force with it wherever it goes. It can launch strikes, provide air cover, conduct reconnaissance and support ground operations all from international waters. No land base required. No permission needed from nervous allies. Just pure mobile American power showing up where it's needed. That capability is irreplaceable. And the Navy knows it. China's carrier killer missiles are psychological weapons as much as physical ones. They're meant to make the US think twice about operating near China. They're supposed to create doubt. Make admirals nervous. Keep carriers far away during a crisis. Plans around them. But thinking about a threat isn't the same as being paralyzed by it. The difference is preparation versus panic. And the US Navy doesn't panic. They've been playing this game for decades. Everyone said Soviet submarines would sink the carriers. Didn't happen. After that, it was anti-ship cruise missiles. Carriers adapted. Now it's ballistic missiles and hypersonics. And the carriers will adapt again. Because that's what they do. That's what the Navy does. They identify threats, develop counters, and keep sailing. It's worked for 80 years and it's going to keep working. So the next time you see a headline screaming about carrier killers and the death of American naval power, remember this. The people writing those headlines aren't the ones sailing into contested waters. The admirals are. The captains are. The sailors are. And they're doing it with confidence because they know something. The headline writers don't. They know exactly what those carriers can do. They know what the defenses can handle. And they know that the gap between theory and reality is where American naval superiority lives. That gap is measured in training, technology, experience, and sheer operational capability. It's the difference between building a missile that might work in perfect conditions and building a fleet that works in the worst conditions imaginable. China can keep testing their carrier killers in the desert. Russia can keep making PowerPoint presentations about hypersonic wonder weapons. Iran can keep making threats about closing the Strait of Hormuz. And the US Navy will keep doing what it's been doing since 1945. Sailing wherever it damn well pleases. Because it can. Because the oceans are big, the defenses are layered, the crews are trained, and the missiles aren't nearly as scary as the people selling them want you to believe. The age of the aircraft carrier isn't over. Not by a long shot. It's just entering a new phase where the threats are different but the response is the same. Adapt, overcome, and keep those floating cities exactly where they need to be. In the water. In the fight. And very much not afraid.